In the forgotten town of Ravenswood, where mist clung to the crooked rooftops and the streets grew silent long before midnight, there stood a cemetery older than memory itself. Generations of townsfolk had buried their dead within its rusting iron gates, but none spoke freely of it. Parents warned their children never to wander near it after dark. The elders whispered that it was not a graveyard in the ordinary sense, but a prison of secrets, a place where truth itself refused to stay buried. The most chilling tales spoke of the new moon. On those nights, when the sky was swallowed in darkness and the stars seemed dimmer than usual, the tombstones of Ravenswood shifted. The names remained the same, but new inscriptions bled into the stone, truths hidden in life but revealed in death. Some told of forbidden passions, others of betrayals that rotted the soul, and some of sins so unspeakable they were erased from history. Few dared to test these stories, but Valerie, young, brilliant, and consumed by a hunger for the past, could not resist. She was no stranger to dusty libraries and forgotten archives, but books and records were never enough. She wanted the voices, the whispers that history had silenced. And so, on the night of the new moon, armed with a notebook, a flashlight, and a camera, she entered Ravenswood Cemetery. The iron gates groaned open at her touch, a scream of rusted hinges that echoed through the night. Beyond them lay endless rows of crooked tombstones, their shapes black against the faint glow of the stars. The air was colder there, heavy with the scent of damp soil, moss, and something else, something metallic, like dried blood. Valerie's flashlight beam cut through the darkness. The first stones she examined looked ordinary, names, dates, the usual epitaphs. But then, as she lingered, she saw the words shift. Her breath caught in her throat. Letters twisted and rearranged themselves, crawling across the stone like living veins. One read, "Betrayed her sister for a handful of silver." Another, "Drowned her child beneath the river's ice." Another still, "Loved a man who was her brother's sworn enemy." She staggered back, the cold seeping into her bones, but her fascination outweighed her fear. Page after page in her notebook filled with these revelations. Some were heartbreaking. Lovers kept apart by family feuds, sacrifices made in silence. Others were vile. Murders hidden, cruelty masked by wealth, lies that ruined lives. Then came the voices. At first faint, like a breeze curling through the trees, then louder, distinct. Valerie spun around, her flashlight darting from shadow to shadow, until she saw them. Figures, pale, translucent, wavering like smoke in the wind, emerged from the darkness. Their eyes glowed faintly, not with malice, but with desperate longing. Valerie froze, paralyzed with terror. Her heart pounded against her ribs like a drum, but then she realized they were not advancing to harm her. They gathered around her like moths to a flame, their mouths moving in silent pleas. Then the whispers reached her. "Tell them I never meant for him to die. She poisoned me. Don't let her name be honored. I loved her in silence for 40 years. Write it down. He buried me alive. Please, please tell them." Valerie's shaking hand scribbled furiously in her notebook. She had no choice. The dead were pouring their stories into her, and she was the only vessel to carry them back to the living. Time seemed to vanish as spirit after spirit pressed forward, whispering confessions, sorrows, and pleas for justice. Some wept as they spoke. Others raged, their hollow faces twisted with fury at the lies history had preserved. A few carried tenderness in their voices, speaking of loves that gave them comfort even in death. Valerie felt herself drowning in their words, their pain seeping into her bones, but she could not stop. Hours passed, or perhaps only minutes. She could no longer tell. The night thickened, her flashlight dimmed, and the cold became unbearable. She realized that she was surrounded not by dozens, but by hundreds of spirits, all clamoring for her attention. The cemetery had become a sea of faces, pale and endless, each begging for release. As dawn's first light touched the horizon, the spectral crowd began to fade. Their whispers softened to sighs, then vanished into silence. The tombstones shifted once more, erasing their dark confessions, returning to simple names and dates. Valerie collapsed onto the cold ground, exhausted, her notebook filled with pages trembling in her grip. When she finally left the cemetery, she was no longer the woman who had entered. She was something else, not just a historian, but a keeper of ghosts. In the weeks that followed, Valerie turned her notes into a book, The Forgotten Truths of Ravenswood. When it was published, the town erupted. Some were horrified, angry that the sins of their ancestors had been exposed. Others found comfort in knowing the truth, that their forebears had lived real, flawed lives filled with passion and mistakes. The cemetery became a pilgrimage site. Scholars came to study. Families came to seek the hidden truths of their bloodlines. Believers came to feel the presence of the restless dead. Ravenswood was no longer forgotten. It was infamous. But Valerie was restless. At night, she still heard whispers in her ear, voices not recorded in her book. She dreamed of the cemetery, dreams so vivid they left her trembling. The spirits were not finished. There were stories she had not yet heard, and they would not let her go. One evening, unable to resist, Valerie returned to the cemetery. She carried no flashlight, no notebook, only herself. The gates opened as if expecting her. The silence inside was absolute, crushing. The tombstones were waiting, and this time, when the inscriptions shifted, they bore not the truths of the dead, but warnings. Warnings written in her own name.